They thought it was just another chill live, a few laughs, some casual talk, maybe a little nostalgia. But the moment Towanda Braxton hit that go live button, everything shifted because this wasn't content, this wasn't promo, and this definitely wasn't harmless. With one question, give me an example, Towanda cracked open a story fans thought they already understood. A story about Traci, about Toni, about Tamar, about years of pain that reality TV turned into entertainment, and grief the internet turned into judgment. Her tone wasn't loud, but it was sharp, calm but dangerous, the kind of calm that comes right before something explodes. As she stared into the camera, it became clear. This wasn't a sister reminiscing. This was a woman defending her name, her family, and a legacy under attack. Every word felt measured, every pause felt intentional, and every sentence pulled old wounds back to the surface. Suddenly, fans weren't watching a live anymore. They were watching a family narrative collapse in real time. Because when Towanda started talking about editing, about receipts, about how Traci was really treated, it raised one terrifying question. What if everything we believed about the Braxtons was wrong? And once that question hit the timeline, there was no putting it back. The moment Towanda leaned forward and repeated that question, "Give me an example," the energy changed. Not just on the live, but across the entire timeline. Because that wasn't a defensive dodge, that was a challenge, calm, direct, surgical. For years, fans had been loud about one thing. Traci Braxton was mistreated, sidelined, ignored, pushed to the background while the other sisters took center stage. It had become accepted truth online. Nobody questioned it anymore. It lived in comment sections, reaction videos, stitched TikToks, and rewatches of old episodes where Traci cried, stormed off, or sat quietly while chaos swirled around her. Towanda knew all of that. You could see it in her eyes. This wasn't news to her. This was a weight she'd been carrying for years. And when she asked for receipts, she wasn't just talking to trolls. She was talking to a decade of internet judgment that had already made up its mind. What shook people wasn't just the question, it was the silence that followed. No timestamps, no specific scenes, no clear moment where Towanda herself had crossed that line. Fans had memories, feelings, impressions. But when pressed to name an actual act, the room got uncomfortable. That's when it hit people. The narrative might not be as clean as they thought. Towanda didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry, she didn't deflect. She stayed focused. She made it clear she couldn't speak for everyone, not Toni, not Tamar, not producers, only herself. And in doing that, she separated something important. Being part of a family doesn't mean owning every moment of dysfunction, but the internet never allowed that nuance. To fans, the Braxtons were one unit, one hive mind, one shared guilt, and Traci's passing only intensified that guilt. After Traci died, every old clip became evidence. Every disagreement was reinterpreted as cruelty. Every moment of tension was rebranded as proof that she wasn't valued. Grief sharpened the lens. Fans weren't just watching scenes anymore, they were mourning someone they felt they knew. And in that mourning, blame had to land somewhere. Towanda understood that too. You could hear it when her voice softened just slightly, when she acknowledged the pain people were holding on to, but she refused to accept lies built on edits. That's when she pulled the curtain back. She started talking about production, about how reality TV doesn't just capture moments, it rearranges them, stretches them, repeats them, turns small comments into running jokes, and normal reactions into defining traits. She didn't say it bitterly. She said it matter of fact, like someone finally tired of pretending the audience didn't know how the game worked. Then she brought up Toni. That example hit harder than people expected. The prom episode, a moment fans remembered clearly. Toni mentioning prom again and again, to the point where it became a punchline. But Towanda explained that in real life, Toni mentioned it only a few times. Editing turned it into a loop, a character trait, something fans mocked for years without realizing they were laughing at something manufactured. And suddenly, people started replaying everything in their heads. If that could happen to Toni, the most protected sister, the one with the cleanest image, then what about Traci? What about Tamar? What about every tear and argument fans swore was raw and unfiltered? Towanda didn't stop there. She talked about how scenes from different days were stitched together to look like one continuous fight, how reactions were pulled from unrelated moments and placed where they fit the storyline best, how silence could be framed as rejection, how walking away could be edited to look like abandonment. Reality, she implied, was never reality, and that revelation landed heavy because it forced fans to confront an uncomfortable truth. They hadn't just been watching a family fall apart. They'd been watching a version of that family shaped by people whose job was to make things look worse than they were. Then Towanda said the line that sent shockwaves through social media. "We're not a cast." It didn't sound rehearsed. It sounded exhausted, like someone reminding the world of something that should have been obvious. This wasn't a group of strangers clocking in for drama. These were sisters with decades of shared history, childhood roles, old resentments, unspoken expectations. When they argued on camera, it didn't end when filming stopped. It followed them home. It sat at the dinner table. It lingered in group chats and holidays. The cameras amplified what was already fragile. And for the first time, fans had to ask themselves if they'd crossed a line. Watching was one thing, enjoying the mess was another. But using Traci's memory as a weapon against her sisters, Towanda made it clear that wasn't acceptable. Her tone sharpened when she addressed that directly. She drew a boundary, loud and clear. She said the sisters could talk crazy about each other, but outsiders couldn't. That wasn't shade, that was a warning, and the chat knew it. The jokes slowed, the laughing emojis stopped. Because Towanda wasn't speaking as a reality star anymore. She was speaking as a sister who lost someone and was tired of seeing that loss turned into ammunition. But then came the question nobody expected to hit that live: money. A viewer asked why the Braxtons weren't paid like the Kardashians. And for a split second, Towanda looked genuinely annoyed. She questioned how anyone could even know their pay. Those numbers weren't public. But the question had already done its damage, because it cracked open a bigger conversation, not just about money, but about value. The comparison was unavoidable. Two families, two reality shows. One turned chaos into a billion-dollar empire. The other aired their pain and walked away fractured, with far less to show for it. Towanda didn't spell it out, but she didn't need to. The frustration sat heavy in her response. The Braxtons gave authenticity, real fights, real tears, real scars, and yet the payoff never matched the sacrifice. She started talking about age, about life before cameras. She said she was 36 when the show started. Already grown, already shaped by decades of family dynamics that viewers never saw. Those blow-ups weren't random. They were rooted in childhood patterns, sibling roles, and unresolved history that reality TV had no interest in healing. Producers didn't care where the pain came from. They cared how it looked on screen. And that's when something subtle but important happened. Towanda laughed. Her husband cracked a joke. The vibe shifted for a moment. On the surface, it looked like the live was moving on, but the damage was already done. Because fans weren't laughing anymore. They were dissecting, rewatching clips, pulling threads. The live had stopped being casual the moment Towanda challenged the narrative. What started as a defense turned into a confession. And once she exposed the machinery behind the show, nothing could be unseen. People weren't just questioning how Traci was treated anymore, they were questioning everything. And Towanda knew it. She didn't rush to clean it up. She didn't soften the message. She let the questions hang there, unanswered, heavy, and dangerous. Because once a family story is reopened like that, it doesn't close quietly. it spills. And this was only the beginning. The live stopped belonging to Towanda. It belonged to the internet. Clips started getting screen recorded while she was still talking. Comments flew faster than anyone could read. Old episodes were being scrubbed in real time, paused, zoomed in, reinterpreted. The audience wasn't just listening anymore, they were investigating. And the deeper they dug, the messier it got, because the next name to catch fire was Tamar. Towanda never directly said Tamar was a victim. She didn't have to. Her explanation about editing did all the talking for her. Fans had watched Tamar for years through one narrow lens, loud, explosive, dramatic. The one always yelling, always crying, always too much. But if editing could loop Toni's prom comments into a joke, what had it done to Tamar's meltdowns? Towanda hinted that Tamar's reactions were stretched, magnified, replayed until her emotional peaks became her entire personality. A sigh turned into an attitude. A breakdown turned into a brand. And suddenly, people started asking a dangerous question. Was Tamar really wild? Or was she framed to be the villain that kept ratings high? That debate split the fandom instantly. Some fans jumped to defend Tamar harder than ever. They said what they saw was real pain, not acting. Others accused Towanda of rewriting history to protect herself, shifting blame onto production instead of taking accountability. And then there were the ones who stayed quiet, rewatching scenes with new eyes, wondering how much had been manipulated without them realizing it. But before that fire could die down, Towanda dropped another revelation that shook everything again: Toni. For years, Toni Braxton had floated above the chaos, calm, controlled, the Grammy-winning big sister who rarely lost her composure on camera. The stable one, the anchor. Towanda admitted that image wasn't accidental. According to her, Toni had moments too. Frustration, tears, disagreements, but many of those never made it to air. Producers protected her, curated her, polished her image while letting the others take the hits. That truth landed like a thunderclap, because it meant the hierarchy fans believed in wasn't natural. It was engineered. Toni wasn't just the calm sister, she was the protected sister. And by keeping her pedestal intact, production may have distorted the entire family dynamic. Viewers weren't seeing the full picture. They were seeing a story shaped to crown one sister while sacrificing the others for drama. That's when people started side-eyeing everything. If Toni's struggles were hidden, if Tamar's chaos was amplified, if Traci's pain was edited into a narrative, then what exactly had fans been watching all those years? Towanda circled back to Traci, and this time her voice changed. The edge softened, the defensiveness faded. This wasn't about the internet anymore, this was personal. She reminded viewers that Traci's life didn't begin with the show and didn't end on camera. There were decades of history the audience never saw. Years of love, arguments, laughter, and heartbreak that couldn't be squeezed into 40-minute episodes. Traci wasn't just the overlooked sister, she was the youngest, constantly trying to find her place in a family full of strong personalities. Her struggle wasn't manufactured, but it also wasn't as simple as fans made it seem. Towanda insisted Traci was loved, included, fought for, but she was also misunderstood by producers chasing storylines and by viewers hungry for villains. That message hit hard because grief doesn't allow for clean answers. Traci's absence sat heavy over the entire conversation. Every defense Towanda made was met with the same haunting question. If Traci were still here, would she agree? Would she say editing twisted her pain, or would she say her sisters ignored her until it was too late? Towanda didn't pretend to know that answer, and that silence spoke volumes. As the live continued, the comments grew sharper. Some fans accused Towanda of minimizing Traci's feelings. Others thanked her for finally speaking up and telling the truth nobody wanted to hear. The fandom split clean down the middle, and the tension only thickened when Towanda addressed the audience directly again. She told them to stop dividing the sisters. not gently, not politely. She repeated it. Firm, final. This wasn't a request, it was a boundary. She reminded everyone that while fans binge the drama for entertainment, the Braxtons live with the fallout. Long after the cameras are gone, they deal with awkward holidays, strained phone calls, and wounds that don't heal just because a season ends. Her husband tried to lighten the mood again, tossing in jokes, laughing it off. But even the laughter couldn't break the heaviness that had settled in. Towanda had already said too much to rewind it. And just when it seemed like the live might cool down, that Kardashian comparison came roaring back. The money question refused to die. Fans kept pushing it, framing it as injustice, exploitation, disrespect. Why did one family turn chaos into billions while another walked away bruised and underpaid? Towanda didn't directly accuse anyone, but her frustration was clear. This wasn't just about contracts, it was about how Black families' pain gets consumed without the same reward or protection. The implication was impossible to ignore. The Braxtons gave raw emotion. The Kardashians gave spectacle. Only one was crowned royalty. That realization reignited the conversation in a bigger way. Blogs picked it up. Commentary channels ran with it. Suddenly, Towanda's live wasn't just about family drama. It was about race, value, and the ethics of reality TV. About who gets exploited and who gets elevated. As the live drifted toward its end, the tone shifted again. Towanda joked, she smiled, she talked about everyday things, but the weight never left. It hung in the background, unspoken but loud. Fans weren't fooled by the lighter vibe. They knew what had just happened. Towanda had cracked open the Braxton legacy. By exposing editing tricks, she challenged a decade of narratives. By defending herself, she pulled her sisters into a conversation they hadn't chosen. By speaking on Traci, she reopened wounds that never fully healed. And once that door opened, it couldn't be closed. Because now the internet wasn't waiting on Towanda anymore. They were waiting on Toni. They were waiting on Tamar. And they were waiting on answers that might never come. What had started as one sister clearing her name had turned into a full-blown narrative war. And the scariest part? The truth wasn't clean. It was layered, messy, and uncomfortable. And everyone knew there was still more to come. By the time Towanda ended that live, the damage wasn't just done, it was multiplying. The conversation didn't slow down, it exploded. Hashtags shot up, clips went viral, soundbites got stripped of context and turned into weapons. Towanda saying, "We're family, not a caste," replayed everywhere. But now it meant different things depending on who was listening. To some, it sounded like truth. To others, it sounded like deflection. And that's when the silence became the loudest voice in the room. Because Toni Braxton hadn't said a word. For years, Toni had mastered silence. She didn't jump into mess. She didn't clap back online. She chose her moments carefully, the way she chose notes in a song. Controlled, polished, strategic. That restraint was part of her brand. But after Towanda's revelations, silence stopped looking graceful and started looking suspicious. Fans flooded Toni's pages, asking questions she never liked answering. Were your breakdowns edited out? Were you protected? Did you let your sisters take the heat while you stayed clean? Every unanswered comment poured gasoline on the fire. In celebrity culture, silence isn't neutral, it's interpreted. And the longer Toni stayed quiet, the more Towanda's version of events began to harden into truth for a lot of people, not because it was proven, but because no one challenged it. Then there was Tamar. Unlike Toni, Tamar never stayed quiet for long. She lived her life out loud. Emotions first, explanations later. Her fans, the Tamartians, had always defended her fiercely, but they were also quick to call out anything that felt like betrayal. Towanda's comments about editing Tamar's reactions reopened a wound that never really healed. Some fans thanked Towanda for finally saying what they'd been screaming for years, that Tamar was pushed into the villain role. Others felt Towanda was using Tamar's pain to clean her own image. And the speculation went wild. Screenshots circulated claiming Tamar was liking shady posts. Blogs hinted she was preparing to go live. Others swore she was furious, feeling exposed without consent. No confirmation, no denial, just rumors stacking on top of rumors until the tension felt unbearable. But through all of it, one name kept pulling everything back to center: Traci. Even in absence, Toni Braxton dominated the conversation. Fans couldn't let go of what they'd seen: the tears, the frustration, the moments where she looked overlooked. Towanda's defense forced the hardest question yet, not about editing, but about accountability. Was Traci's pain exaggerated for television, or was it ignored until it became a storyline? That question cut deeper than any debate about production tricks because it touched guilt. The kind of guilt that lingers forever. Fans went digging. Old clips resurfaced like evidence in a trial. People paused scenes frame by frame. The archive turned into ammunition. Context got lost. Intent got assumed. And suddenly, the Braxton legacy wasn't nostalgic anymore. It was on trial in the court of public opinion. Towanda's husband tried to soften things with humor, but even that couldn't undo what had been unleashed. This wasn't just reality TV drama anymore. It had turned into a case study, a real-time example of how television takes real families, turns their pain into entertainment, and leaves them to clean up the mess alone. And once again, the conversation circled back to money. Fans pointed out the obvious comparison that refused to die. The Kardashians turned dysfunction into a billion-dollar machine. The Braxtons turned authenticity into trauma with far less reward. The more people talked about it, the more uncomfortable it became, because the truth felt ugly and undeniable. The Braxtons gave more honesty, more vulnerability, more pain, and got less in return. Towanda didn't have to say the word exploitation. Everyone else already was. As days passed, Towanda's life stopped being hers. Blogs rewrote it. Commentary channels exaggerated it. Influencers twisted it into headlines. Ironically, the same manipulation she accused producers of was now happening again. Just faster, louder, and without editors in a studio. The internet became the new production room, slicing her words, rearranging her intent, and building new narratives on top of old wounds. And that might have been the cruelest twist of all. Towanda went live to expose manipulation, but in doing so, she fed the machine she was trying to escape. Because once the internet grabs a story, it never lets go. It edits, it exaggerates, it simplifies. And it doesn't care about healing, only engagement. Behind the scenes, whispers started spreading that networks were watching closely. Controversy boosts ratings, and Towanda's live threatened to do two things at once: expose the tricks of reality TV and reignite interest in the Braxton brand. That tension sat heavy. Would this spark a reunion, a reboot, or finally bury the show for good? Meanwhile, the sisters each stood at a crossroads. Toni had legacy to protect. Tamar had a platform ready to explode. Towanda had already spoken. And Traci had no voice left to confirm or deny any of it. That unanswered question haunted everything. If Traci were still here, would she agree with Towanda? Would she say editing twisted her pain? Or would she stand firm and say her struggles were real, visible, and ignored? No one could answer that. And that silence weighed heavier than any accusation thrown online. The fandom fractured completely. Some rallied behind Towanda, praising her for pulling back the curtain and finally telling the truth. Others accused her of rewriting history and quieting Traci's voice in the process. And then there were those waiting, patiently, obsessively, for Toni or Tamar to break their silence and tip the scale. What made it even messier was that each sister had her own lane. Each had the power to shape the narrative in a way that served them best. Every post, every pause, every non-response became another puzzle piece in a story that refused to settle. Towanda may have thought she was defending herself. What she actually did was launch a narrative war. And those wars don't end quietly. They grow, they spread, they swallow everything. By the time the live had been reposted across every major blog, the story didn't belong to the Braxtons anymore. It belonged to the audience. To fans hungry for answers, to critics ready to tear it apart, to a culture that consumes pain and calls it entertainment. And the future of the Braxton name hung in the balance. Would this controversy bring clarity or cause permanent fractures? Would Toni finally speak, risking her polished image to confirm or deny Towanda's truth? Would Tamar go live and unleash her own version of events? And most importantly, would Traci's memory be honored or reduced to another storyline debated by strangers? Towanda cracked the truth wide open, and truth comes with consequences. The Braxton story will never look the same again.